Welcome to PSAC and JWN's Introduction to the Well Cost Data Module. My name is Stephen, and I will be guiding you through this presentation on the basics of understanding and navigating the new Well Cost module, which is housed in the CanWells data platform. In this presentation, we will begin with an explanation of the PSAC cost study, as well as what kind of data is available in the new service. We will then go on to a live demonstration of how to navigate the module, including a demonstration on how to build a custom report. Twice per year for the last 20 years, PSAC has been creating detailed AFE cost profiles for hypothetical wells in key Canadian plays. This has resulted in the accumulation of more than 2,000 well cost profiles, which have been used by energy professionals as a trusted reference benchmark for drilling, completion, and abandonment costs. As of 2016, PSAC has partnered with JWN Energy to transform the paper studies into a relational database which allows users to easily analyze Canadian cost trends and opportunities like never before. The new data module covers 122 unique cost items. They are categorized into drilling, completion, and abandonment components. Items are then grouped into a second level of subcategorization for easy navigation. Cost items can also be traced back to the well profile that they are attributed to so that we can normalize costs against a standardized well base. This means that we can query for wells based on their region, targeted formation, depth, casing requirements, camp needs, and even stimulation profiles. The PSAC well cost module can be accessed through two interfaces in the CanWells data platform. The HTML front-end portal provides users with an interface to explore the data and to identify opportunities for further investigation. The Web Report Builder allows users to generate customized spreadsheets that can be drilled into to identify unique insights in the data. In this next part of the presentation, we're going to do a live walkthrough of how it is a user can navigate and download data from the PSAC well cost module as it's been housed in the CanWells data platform. So starting off at canwells.com, we've got the home page, and I can find my PSAC well cost module right here. I can click into it and get a pop-up to open up, and in doing so I'm accessing the new reporting standard. I maximize this page and I can see that I'm looking at the most recent wells that have been collected for the study. We can see that this is relating to the period of 2016 winter drilling season. The spring season, I believe, comes out just before May. And it looks like in general we're seeing about 42 wells in these studies twice per year. In this particular one, they've covered 12 PSAC regions. In general, what PSAC is doing there is they're isolating specific plays that are relevant to the industry at the time of the study, and they're making sure to focus in on them so that they're capturing the most relevant areas for their industry participants. Looking at this page, we've got a catalog of each of the individual wells that have been studied, some characteristics about where they've been drilled, and what kind of profile we have associated with the well. And then we can do a couple little things here just from the front page. First of all, I can hop into the far end here and download a stick diagram to help me understand a little bit more about what we've done with this well if I want to get into the nitty-gritty details of what we're looking at here. Okay, so this looks good. This looks like something I might want to drill into. I can then, if I just want to go out the gate and download all of the data, I can go right here to the study and download the detailed cost list, just like that. So here's my download window. My spreadsheet pops up. And here we have our first look of the well cost study data as it's been normalized in our database. We have some details here that describe what it is we're looking at, what area, what kind of well is this. We have our cost item profiles. Each of the costs have been categorized into a drilling, completion, or abandonment cost, and then these major categories have a subcategory underneath them just to help you navigate. And then we can use things like the notes and the cost units to help us identify a little bit more about what it is we're looking at and what's gone into the assumptions behind this pricing metric. If we go all the way down, then we can start seeing we have not only the individual units, but we'll have the quantity of units that have gone into this assumption with a driver rate, which gives us our total cost tied to the well. So what we can actually do with this is start overlaying our own assumptions and changing these values to suit whatever well we're actually pricing, but using this as a baseline for, turning it into more of a cost model than it is actually a tool or a study. More on that a little bit later, though. If I go back to my page here, There's some other things we can do within the page to make life a little bit easy. What I like to do usually is I'll identify my well here and click into the well profile to pull up the characteristics and learn a little bit more about what I'm looking at here. So the first thing I see is a description of the PSAC region we're looking at, and my 3 pricing estimates here. So we're pricing out in aggregate the cost of drilling and abandoning this well, drilling and casing the well, and then drilling, casing, and completing the well, which means all in we're probably looking at about $2.9 million to finish this thing. What kind of well is this? Well, it's a gas horizontal well in the Cardium. Doesn't have H2S problems, but if we look through here, we'll also see things like the assumptions for the casings that are going into this. We'll want to make sure we're keeping track of those to see whether this lines up with our own assumptions. And little flags like the stimulation flag. We don't want to be comparing a well that requires stimulation against one that doesn't. In this particular situation, it looks like we've got a well that requires a 10-stage energized slick water frac. We've got a couple of characteristics in there, so we'll just want to keep that in mind when we're looking at this particular profile. So if this looks good, what we can do is hop into our Cost Estimates tab. We can see our 3 situations here priced out in aggregate, but what I like to do here is just jump straight to the breakdown. And if I go to the drilled and completed, so the full profile of this well, I can get the individual components and prices just like we saw in the spreadsheet, but just quickly through the web interface. And again, we can see the individual cost items broken out in an easy to read format with the units and drivers tied to them, as well as the total costs, culminating into the final price of the well. And this is composing of granularity. So we can start seeing that we have pricing for things like the wireline services, the fluid analysis. If we keep going, we'll have drill bits in here, different types of the bits that have gone into the well, testing and coring, all sorts of little breakdowns within the tool that allow us to start overlaying assumptions into the data and really getting an understanding of how it is this well came together. Now that we've seen how it is you can use the front end to navigate and explore through the PSAC well cost data, I'm going to show you how it is you can use the back-end report generator to build out a custom spreadsheet that will help you isolate and analyze custom items within the system. So if I pop into the home page, I can actually go to my reports button, build new report, and we'll find the well cost study button here. And this will take me to the back-end report builder. In this window, what we do is we start off by choosing the items we want to include in the report, and then later we'll filter within them. So let's do things like including our date. The flag for whether it's the latest study is a good one to include, just depending on whether you want recent analysis or historical. Let's get the region code, the area, the well key. This is an important one to include. It's our unique identifier for each individual studied well, good for when you're aggregating and counting items. If I keep going along here, let's grab the assumptions. Assumptions are a great one to start off with because they allowed you to isolate things like whether it's an oil and gas well, the direction grouping, then a couple of key flags, just kind of defining what it is this well is. If I keep going along, we've got things like the drilling fluid type, whether or not there was stimulation on the well. Is it a camp required for the drill? And you can see there's a couple other items in here that are a little bit more detailed. The specifications for the casing are a great one to go off of, whether or not we need a liner, the tubing specifications, just giving us a profile of what's tied into this well. If I keep going along here, I'm going to grab my detailed costs now. And all we have to do here is grab the cost category, the subcategory, and the item. And then, of course, we'll want the number of items, the cost per unit, the costing unit, the cost per unit, and the total cost. In doing so, we've quickly put together a very easy report that will allow us to play around in a pivot table to isolate the key insights that we're looking for here. So I hop into the next page, and now we can start playing around with some filters. I can isolate perhaps a PSAC region if I go in here and just kind of choose what I want. What I'm going to do here actually is I'm going to grab a couple of key formations. So if I go into my target formation, I'm going to say let's stick with Cardium. Let's look at the Montney. Here it is. And we kind of stick with that for now. We've got our breakout. If we keep going along, we can see some other flags in here. The stimulation flag is a good one to keep in mind, whether or not the well has any stimulation applied to it. We don't want to be comparing fracked to non-fracked wells. Same with camps. When we're looking at some more complicated items, we can isolate wells that have a specific casing type in them. So again, just kind of make sure that if we're isolating in on the cost of the completion and casing, we want to make sure that we have a consistent typing in there. Otherwise, we'll have some categorization issues. Finally, if we want to laser in on some specific items, we can go into these category, subcategory, and cost item units. So perhaps I want to stick at the high level and say I'm only interested in drilling or completions data. Or if I go into the subcategory, I can say perhaps I'm only interested in the general construction costs that apply across all of those categories, or the equipment rentals that apply across all of those categories. So you will see rentals across multiple cost categories, but they'll manifest under the subgroupings. So you will be isolating those items. Or if we want to get extremely specific, we can go into the actual cost items here. And this is every single item in the system. And so what we can do is say, you know what, I only care about the lease maintenance costs, kind of the upgrading costs here, reclamation, rig moving, just kind of picking individual ones, the drill bits perhaps, and this will allow you to boil into a specific report item. That being said, what I actually like to do is I will include everything in this report and just go broad. And I'll usually stick with my areas and my date ranges for my search. And the reason why I'll do that is because I like to analyze my data in pivot tables, and that allows me the flexibility to play around with the data in an environment I'm more familiar with. Something to keep in mind then is we have options here for the layouts. If I pull this report right now, and we'll just pull the HTML pop-up here real quick, we'll see that the layout of the data is very conducive for a person to read. But what I'm going to need here, if I want my pivot table, is something with iteration. Because if we look here, we have, okay, here's my first well. That's the well key tied in. And then we have all of the cost items tied to that well. And if I scroll down, 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 oops, I think I passed it. There we go. We can see the individual wells popping through on this side. Here we go. Here's another one. So it's pretty easy for a human to kind of see that logic and to go through here in Excel. But if I want to build this into a pivot table or a data model, I need this in a different format so the computer can understand it. So what I'm going to do here is just go into my pre-built options in the system and say show repeated data. And if I download that into Excel, we'll see it's a bit more conducive to a data model. So popping in here, you can see it's now iterated, and that allows my Excel tables to start making some sense of the data. Rather than having you sit through watching me build a pivot table, I've actually pre-built one here. So we can see very similar data here to what I just downloaded, isolating, I believe we have the Cardium, the Montney, and the Duvernay actually I put together in this report. And I've put them together into a pivot table with a couple of slicers so we can analyze the data. So if we look in here how the setup, I've applied some filters, I've got some column categories with my actual items, and I've put my areas across the rows. And then if we look at my filters, okay, I've isolated a date range, I've isolated a couple of regions, I've said I want only the horizontal wells in here. I only want wells that have had some stimulation applied to them. I don't care if they're oil or gas. I might want to obviously fix that later though, because we are comparing across an oil and a gas region here. And we've got my three comparisons here. And if we look at my chart, one of the key insights you can see right away is that the Montney has a much larger completion and testing cost component here. This is the total or expected cost of an average well in the Montney, as compared to the Cardium. And the idea being we've identified a trend here between the average of the total cost of these components to the well. But we need to drill in on this now. Why is it that it costs more to complete and test a well in the Montney than it does in the Cardium? Well, let's go in here and expand our grouping because I've stacked these items. What we can actually see here is, okay, if we go through, we're going to see things like completion fluids and chemicals are coming in at a higher cost, a dramatically higher cost right here. If we keep going along, we'll see, okay, downhole equipment rentals are a lot more. So one more in here. Here we go, stimulation costs. And basically what we're seeing here is evidence that not only is completion more expensive in the Montney, but the chemicals and the completion and the stimulations as a function of the increased fracking that goes on in the Montney compared to the Cardium are driving up costs. And we can see how that manifests across the complexity of the formations. But how does that look over time? If we pop in here, let's isolate the Montney and let's see, okay, there's a trend right now where between 2009 and 2011, pretty much mostly in the 2010 area, completion costs spiked. That's very interesting because we're seeing now a trend where perhaps there was an influx of activity and completions in the Montney that required costs to go up. So let's pop in here and see what happened in that area. And sure enough, we're again seeing the completion and testing component spiking on us. And if we go through and look at our 2010 region, we will see this largely has to do with our chemical components. We're looking at, in this case, nitrogen manifested. Perfing costs went up quite a bit. And just as an average trend, we can kind of see how it is that stimulation costs went up. And perhaps what happened here is that there was an influx of activity in the region and the service and supply community just had trouble keeping up. That created a quick spike, but then they reconciled that and got up to the demand. What's interesting then here is if we click into the Cardium, we'll see a couple years later, right after that happened, there's also an influx that carries through, and a very similar pattern repeating itself within the completion and testing. And sure enough, if we go through, we can start seeing where it is these costs started spiking, and they are the exact same items that hit the Montney. Now the question here is, did the cost spike in the Montney region precede this Cardium cost inflation? And was it perhaps a driver because everyone was so active in the northern regions over there that they didn't have a chance to rush over and meet the changing needs in the Cardium? And how is it we could use that Montney data to predict not only the instance of the price increase, but the magnitude of it, so we could plan around it and perhaps not get hit by that cost spike, or if we're a service and supply company, position ourselves to take advantage of it.